Welcome everyone. So we're in for a bit of a show tonight. I'm joined by the man, the legend that is Ian Lavery, and my two fantastic comrades, Bonnie Craven and Sarah Grant, who I'm sure you've heard on our show before. So this evening we're intending to discuss some of the issues that have kind of baked in problems that has led into the pandemic. Lots of issues around austerity we can see have made things worse, but also this week it's been the 3.5-year anniversary of Grenfell, that shocking tragedy. So I just want to recap on some of the facts on that and then ask some questions to our panellists. So we all remember probably that Boris announced in 2013 that he was closing 12 fire stations in London. He axed 18 fire engines and 520 firefighters, and he was warned that this would cost lives, and he described it as improving fire cover. So of course we know what unfolded after that. After the tragedy at Grenfell, they made promises to the families that they would be rehoused and that all buildings with cladding would have them removed. Now, of course, 3.5 years later, that hasn't happened, and Labour has brought this motion to the Commons this week about getting rid of the cladding. So I was wondering if we could start with that, Ian, to give us a bit of more of a background on what that motion was about, or the current situation with cladding around the country, if you could, please.
Well, first of all, Jennifer, thanks very much for the kind invitations. Great to be on with Sarah, Bonnie, and yourself. This situation with Grenfell is just absolutely unforgivable. And every time we talk about Grenfell, we should always remember the fact that 72 people lost their lives, 70 actually at the time, 2 in hospital following that. And those 223 people escaped. This was preventable. This was absolutely preventable, and we should always remember and mourn those who died such a horrific death. We should also look at what's happened since then as well, Jennifer, and that is who was looking to apportion blame in what direction. And for me, it's quite clear. And that it's the government, it's the contractors that were involved at the time. The only people who aren't to blame are those that were sadly killed in the tragedy, and of course those that were involved in the tragedy themselves. They're the ones who are still, the people who suffered the most and lost the most. We've got people in this country now, I think somebody said up to 11 million people now living in buildings which are unsafe. We've got people in prison. I think 1.9 million people cannot really get rid of their properties. They're unsaleable, they're unmortgageable, they're uninsurable. But the most important thing is they're unsafe. And I'm sick to death of hearing people from politicians from whatever colour, simply saying we're dealing with it. We cannot have parents sitting frightened night after night after night in these unsafe buildings, tucking their babies in bed, reading them stories, worried in case we have a Grenfell too. Never mind who's got to pay for getting rid of the cladding and remedying the whole situation. Never let me argue about the costs afterwards. The government should stick by their pledges. They should say what Johnson said, what you said at the beginning of the show. This should be ensuring that everybody lives in a safe property in this country. So I'll tell you what, mate. I'll tell you what. A Grenfell 2 would be an absolute nightmare, and that is the real danger. And I've got to say it just before I finish this rant of mine. Wasn't it an absolute disgrace that the people, credit to the London Ambulance Service, the Air Ambulance Service, the Police Service, the Fire and Rescue Service, but at the inquiry, wasn't it an absolute disgrace the way in which people from the Fire and Rescue Service, many from the Fire Brigades Union, who are fantastic individuals, everyone a hero as far as I'm concerned. Wasn't it a disgrace that there was a lot of laser-like focus on those individuals and looking for the establishment to apportion blame to those who were running towards Grenfell, not those that were running away. Every one of those people, the emergency services, everybody who rallied around on that night deserves a medal the size of the proverbial judge being laid. And we should never, ever, ever forget that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I really share those concerns as well, that I feel like the way the inquiry's been set up doesn't seem like they want to unpick those structural issues, do they? They are definitely blaming the wrong people in the most disgraceful way, pointing the finger at firefighters, and then leaving us vulnerable to future tragedies. So I imagine, Bonnie, it being almost on your doorstep, that the feelings are still very strong, as they are for all of us, but having it so close by and feeling, you know, that kind of impact that it must have had on your community. So do you think, like, you must be aware of some of those issues that built in locally when they weren't listening to the people in the tower raising concerns and things like that, and the responses from the local council? Do you feel like there's much change locally? Like, do you get that feeling in London that people are understanding?
Well, I mean, obviously the whole motivation for this cladding was to jolly up or gentrify big tower blocks to make them more attractive and more acceptable to people who are spending, particularly where Grenfell is, properties there go for an absolute fortune. So what it was almost to mask the social housing, to make it acceptable to people that are spending a lot of money living in the area. And what we see time after time is ordinary working class people being put at risk to satisfy whims of people with a lot more money than them. And what I think is really important to remember as well is all of those people who lost their homes in the Grenfell Tower. You know, obviously a lot of lives were lost and it's absolutely appalling. But hundreds and hundreds of families were cast out of their homes, and the local authority really struggled to failed to put them in proper permanent housing following it. And yet elsewhere in that borough, there was a large estate, social housing estate owned by the Suttons Trust. And at the same time as this fire, the local authority was still moving families who had lived and developed communities for generations in the Sutton buildings in the same borough for a redevelopment project. And since before the fire till now, those flats have sat there empty. They had the kitchens and the bathrooms gutted by the local authority, and they were ready-made housing that could have accommodated very easily all of the people that lost their homes in Grenfell and the people that moved out of those homes out of London. So moving working class people out of London to places where housing was less expensive and perhaps arguably less desirable, to satisfy the demand for very expensive penthouse flats. You know, it just tells the absolute story, doesn't it? And you know, and Grenfell isn't the only tower block with that cladding on, and it's not only tower blocks as well. Something that really bothers me as a person with particular focus on the NHS and education is the number of PFI projects in hospitals and schools where this cheap cladding has been thrown up again to make the place look pretty or attractive or acceptable in any other way, shape or form. And we're seeing people in hospital critically ill at risk of being burned down like those people were in Grenfell. And obviously if you're an ICU, it's not very easy to be evacuated from a hospital that's on fire.
No, it's absolutely disgraceful. So that point around them not rehousing people when they had the opportunity, I just think the people that are making these decisions can't possibly know what it's like to live in desperate housing need. I mean, never mind to have gone through such a trauma like that, which is almost beyond my comprehension, but just to actually need a house when you haven't got a safe, decent, secure home to live in, that is a massive trauma for people to live through. And I know, Sarah, you're involved with housing, aren't you, through your day job, so you must see those kind of pressures that are put on the community now. We just don't have enough housing stock, do we?
No, I mean, obviously, yeah, in my day job I'm working in the housing sector. Obviously the massive, for decades there was no new council housing built due to blockages put on by successive Tory governments. And obviously the right to buy that was available before 1980, but it was the council that had to give permission for the house to be sold, and what Thatcher did, she put the power in the hands of the tenants, and they could basically request it, and it had to be granted, subject to certain conditions. So obviously what you've got now is that council housing and housing association housing, obviously it used to, doctors used to live next door to bin men, and it was, the communities were very, very mixed, and it brought the whole community up. Now what you've got now is that housing is allocated on a needs basis rather than a want. So what you've got now is that the people that are getting council housing now, they have very intense mental health problems, drug abuse. You tend to get a lot of social behaviour as a result of that. Obviously, there's no good quality jobs. Why would you want a 0-hour job? Why would you want to live like that? So obviously these, and obviously you've got young people mixing with elderly people, and obviously that never mixes as well since the allocations policy got rid of age-related allocations. So all these are basically creating quite a big problem within the social housing sector. I do feel housing is something I do feel strongly about. Obviously, because it's a general interest due to what I work, and the UK doesn't have a great record of providing good quality housing to people at all. And Grenfell is a startling, it's a startling example of that. And fire safety in particular is I'm currently doing a piece of work actually on fire safety for an apprenticeship I'm doing. One of the main things I liked about Labour's manifesto in 2019 was the implementation of the Decent Homes 2 standard. The Decent Home standard, for anybody that doesn't know what it is, it's what the Labour government brought in 2000, and it was basically, they looked at the housing stock, and this is a great example of how Labour, bring people up and bring the standard of living up. It's a great example of that, and it helped hundreds of thousands of people in council housing. And what the Decent Home standard was, it gave councils and housing associations 10 years up to 2010, and everyone got it was a massive amount of funding provided by Labour government, and they all got new kitchens, windows, new bathrooms, because half of them had not been changed since the when they were built in the maybe 1960s. So a lot of people have had really low quality old facilities within their property, and it was a great example of how Labour does actually and it was a massive programme what they did, but it did really improve people's lives. New bathrooms, insulation, new windows, and new kitchens. Amazing programme. And what the 2019 manifesto wanted to begin was to implement put a fire safety standard in there, and put fire safety and safety in the home as like a common thread throughout the housing system. Basically, that's what Labour wanted to do. And obviously they wanted to retrofit sprinklers in all high-rise tower blocks. And the problem with what the government's trying to do at the minute, they keep mentioning cladding, but cladding isn't the only fire safety aspect to look at. And this, what is it, 1.6 billion funding that they're saying that people are getting, but that doesn't cover half of what fire safety is all about. You're on about exits and things like that. And the government's already broken its promise to implement the findings of the Grenfell inquiry, because they last year they wanted them for fire safety departments to have plans of buildings, materials, where the fire exits are, how many flats there were, all things like that. And they're refusing to do it. So already the government is showing exactly its intentions, which is to do absolutely nothing. And I saw something in Australia. Australia have got a similar kind of problem with cladding. They had a big fire in 2014. After Grenfell, they really started with this. The similar kind of thing that we want the government to do. And they've already identified and audited over 2,000 tower blocks that need doing. They've already prioritised them in works. Which ones are the most at risk, and put them in categories. And they've already done this, and this is in Australia. So why can the government not do it in this country? Because
absolutely,
the
time
Tories.
and time again, we see our government completely failing, don't we? You just have to compare everything about the pandemic response in this country to almost everywhere else, and you can see that they haven't got a clue, have they? Ian, do you know, on the technical basis, was the things like sprinklers that Sarah mentioned there, was that included in Labour's motion, or do you know if we've still got plans to bring issues like that back? Was it?
Well, I think there's obviously a lot of things on the table, the recommendations from the inquiry as well, but the demands that the Labour Party have asked, what the Labour Party want is a cladding task force, and they've got like 6 key demands from that task force. The first one is immediate, this is really important, I mentioned already, Jennifer, immediate upfront funding for removing the cladding and other urgent fire safety work. So it's not just the cladding, it's other urgent fire safety work. And that means the government paying for to make these properties safe for the people who live in them, and argue about who pays the money after that. Really important. The second one is protecting the leaseholders by pursuing those responsible for the cladding scandal, pursuing them for the costs, the contractors. Isn't any good? The contractors are people meeting with some representatives of the local authority this week. It happened bloody 4 years ago, but they're just meeting them this week because they've not accept their responsibilities. And the third issue was a new legally enforceable 2022 deadline to make homes safe. It is 2021 now, so I know it sounds like a long way away, but that's item 3. Item 4 is legislation to protect residents from costs. Again, because of what we've already mentioned, these people are prisoners in their own properties, and it's absolutely outrageous that these people have been treated in this way. We see getting the market moving by ensuring affected residents can sell, not only sell, but remortgage as well, because that's again important to the individuals that are in there. And the last issue on the key demands for the cladding task force is stamping out road builders by reforming the sector. And again, that has got to be, well, it is a key demand. So we've got those 6 key demands, and we cannot hang around. Jennifer, I've got to say, this is, it's a time bomb. It's ticking, and we've got to deal with these issues, not in 5-6 weeks' time, but like yesterday, to support all those people in those properties and the surrounding areas. We've got to do everything we can to make sure that not just that they feel safe, but that they are safe. Is that not what a caring government should be doing? Last night in the Commons, Robert Jenrick didn't even turn up. This is the man who's responsible for Grenfell. He's the Secretary of State, and the man didn't even turn up to the House of Commons to the debate on how we're going to deal with this issue. Now, that is something which people should be querying. Why on earth the government representative at the top level didn't even turn up to the debate? Absolutely unbelievable. Absolutely appalling in my view.
It is absolutely disgusting. I'm really glad that Labour is pushing forward on this issue. But even just listening to them, I'm thinking that we've got other challenges to come, obviously, on so many fronts now with like health and safety, because it shows that the system isn't working. We haven't got enough of a system in place to stop these things happening. In my day job as a trade union tutor, one of my roles is to train people to be health and safety reps. So I'm quite aware of some of the impacts of austerity on health and safety. So the HSE has had its budget cut by 1/3 since 2010. So that's meant a big impact on the number of inspectors that they've got that can go out and look at these things. But actually, since lockdown, since the first lockdown, they stopped going out to visit. And so I'm hearing every week from workers in all sorts of different circumstances, some absolutely terrible, terrible things that are happening where they can't keep themselves safe. They can't socially distance. They can't do even the basic things in many workplaces, and inspectors aren't going out. So of course, because the money's been cut, cases aren't being brought to court either. So there's literally hardly any likelihood at the moment of anybody being held accountable for things that are more than likely killing people right now, because the risks aren't being properly mitigated because of COVID. So that's just one area where I can see that austerity is actually having a catastrophic impact on people's lives. It gets me so mad I can't even get my words out. I just think if they knew what that was like for people on the shop floor, you wouldn't dream of cutting budgets for things like that. It's absolutely essential. We need to be strengthening, not weakening. So I just want to ask all of you, because I'm sure you must see this, like I can see areas of austerity that has had a big impact on how we've dealt with the pandemic. So what kind of things have you seen that we need to not just put back, but, you know, improve on? What kind of damage have you seen that austerity has caused that has made it harder for us to meet the challenges of this pandemic? But Ian, if I come back to you first, what kind of things have you seen, or would you like to change the most?
Well, I think just to remain on topic, Jennifer, the situation with regard to the health and safety executive. You know, the health and safety executive are the body which are tasked with looking after the health and safety of people at work. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, for example, and subsequent regulations, and much more before that as well. And the reality is, COVID hasn't caused the reduction in workplace inspections. Austerity has. The workplace inspections were cut back shortly after the Conservatives took power. You know, like 10, nearly 11 years ago now. And the fact is that the health and safety executive now, when the inspectorate, the HMI, they used to be really proactive. They used to be, they would go into the workplace unannounced. That's what they could do under the act that's within their remit. That would, you know, if they got some tip-offs, or if they just wanted to, the inspector wanted to visit somewhere, they could do that. And quite often they would find issues in the workplace, which quite often they would put an order in to close down either that part of the business or the business entirely, until they remedied the faulty equipment, for example, or whatever. But then they became more reactive rather than proactive, because they reduced the amount of inspectors. And that only does one thing. It means that more employers will chance themselves, they'll cut corners, because they understand clearly that it's unlikely that the inspector will knock at their door. And if the inspector did come knocking at their door and had a look around the different workplaces, then it would be highly unlikely that any penalties that would be served would cost them financially. That cannot be the case. And what we have seen, you know, during the pandemic, for example, we haven't seen any, not one employer taken to task by the health and safety exec. Not one, mind. And I mean, I've heard like lots and lots and lots of different issues in different workplaces where the regulations aren't under any way being observed, whether it's social distancing, whether it's masks, whether it's washing your hands, whether it's hand sanitizer. You know, the norm is that people aren't actually doing this, and people find it okay. And the health and safety executive decided very early on in the pandemic that they wouldn't be doing any workplace inspections because of the pandemic. Well, where the heck does that leave hard-working, ordinary people in the workplace? It's like an open book to the bad employers. Every employer is not a bad employer. The good employers are being absolutely fantastic, but there's some really bad employers out there. And they've got no fears, they've got no worries. they can do what they want. Many of these businesses, by the way, in my view, and I'm sure in the view of many people, aren't essential businesses, really shouldn't be in operation. They should be telling the workforce to stop at home. They should be furloughed. They should have this correct financial support from the government so people can stop at home rather than get into these environments. But I've heard like lots, Jennifer, different types of environments where there isn't any measures or anti-COVID measures in the workplace. But it is frightening, isn't it? It really is frightening. It's nearly a year, well, probably just over a year now since we got into the pandemic. Not one single employer is being brought to task for any misdemeanor. No, any reasonable individual will have to accept that there's something sadly wrong, and that's probably, in terms of work related issues, that in the pandemic, that's a major concern to me. I'm the chairman of the All Parliamentary Group on Safety and Health, and we have been discussing this issue as late as last week.
Well, it's really stunning stuff, isn't it? So, Bonnie, have you got anything that you'd like to come in with on that?
My goodness me, I could come in with so much. I work for a transport trade union. Our members are frontline key workers, and some of the practices that I've seen they would turn your hair white overnight. It's just been horrendous. I hope that in the fullness of time there will be proper investigations and into things that have gone wrong. I mean, everyone will be aware of the number of transport workers that have died during this pandemic that probably shouldn't have been exposed to the risk that they were exposed to. So yeah, what I would say is, for God's sake, join a trade union. Then you've got someone to fight for you and try and make things, as safe as possible for you. But the other thing I also wanted to mention as well with regards to austerity and cost cutting is the impact of cutting costs on building safety. I mean, one of the big problems we've seen in our public buildings is the fact that so many of them have been built on dodgy PFI contracts, which, this is a whole other argument. The whole point of PFI was to shift a debt off of a balance sheet and pay it off sometime in the never, forgetting the fact that those properties, those buildings would never actually be owned by the people that are paying. It's not like a mortgage. That building, that property never belongs to the local authority, the health authority, whoever it is that's paying the PFI debt. And because these have been built by contractors, the proper checks and measures haven't been insisted upon. And what we've seen, in fact, there's a guy called Stephen McKenzie, who was the chair of the National Healthcare Fire Officers Association. So, he's a real expert on this. And he wrote recently to Johnson, warning of a potential disaster similar to Grenfell at a UK hospital, which would lead to a catastrophic loss of life. He asked in this letter for an investigation into the PFI projects in England, given several hospitals built under these projects have been left with significant fire defects following the collapse of the PFI company that had the contract for building them. I think it's important to note as well that we all heard about contractual companies going bust, like Carillion and so on, as a result of the recession and everything, and austerity. Interestingly, the current plan by the government is to build 40 new hospitals. Now, I live in an area where one of these new hospitals is supposed to be being built, and I can assure you it's anything but a hospital. The budget for these 40 new hospitals is £3.7 billion to build 40 PFI hospitals. So obviously that's not the total cost of the hospital, but this is just the deposit, if you like, for these schemes to go ahead. And I'm really, really concerned, given the companies have gone bust and given the complete lack of any sort of concern for health and safety. I'm really, really concerned for what that would mean. I mean, compare that to the £1.6 billion that's been pledged for private residential sector to correct the cladding problem. The budget for fixing hospitals in this country who've got this unsafe cladding is just £2.4 million. You know, it's a drop in the ocean. You know, once again, money's going to sort out people who privately own properties, and everyone else who needs to rely on the National Health Service or live in local authority housing, you know, can burn for all they care.
Wow, what an absolute scandal. I had no idea. That is really shocking. Sarah, when you were listening to all this, have you got any thoughts that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, when we first went into lockdown, we dealt with the emergency food parcels and stuff like that initially. We did that for about a couple of months. And obviously, I think I was talking to Bonnie at the time, and we were literally overwhelmed immediately overwhelmed by emergency food parcels and things like, you know, obviously we gave assistance to people that needed prescriptions and stuff, collecting as well. But it did actually shock me, the immediate need for it. And it struck me that how many people in every town don't have food in the cupboard. Because why would we wouldn't need an emergency food parcel like that straight away. We've got tins of things in the cupboard, you know, you can get by for a certain amount of time. And it just struck me how many people don't have, you know, a stock of a bit of tin food in the cupboard and stuff like that. That was a thing that even me, you know, being quite, you know, political, it did shock me about how the immediate demand, and we were literally overwhelmed by it. We couldn't get through them all. And that really did strike me. Also, the thing with the schools, the thing that struck me mostly with the schools, are the kids. It's just, for me, it's just blown how much inequality caused by austerity is in the country. I mean, you've got kids that don't have access to internet, and they don't have laptops, they don't have tablets. And there's so many kids that are missing out on their education. They're being forced back to school by the government. The government perpetuates inequality. They're not assisting kids from well-off families at all. And it's leaving, you know, families exposed. It's leaving children exposed. And it's the government. It's this austerity and this the fixing the roof way of thinking. And it's just perpetuating this total structural inequality in the country, and it really it's leaving all these families at risk, and I think that's the thing that struck me mostly about all this, and what the causes, you know, the results of inequality, of austerity, is this inequality, and it's making these, you know, less well-off families at risk in a pandemic.
100%, you can totally see it. What's really infuriating me at the moment with that is that there's a lot of focus on, we've got to solve the inequality of children's education by getting everybody back into school now before it's safe, rather than saying, well, look at all this baked in inequality that's existed through society and made much worse by austerity. Why aren't we putting into place a serious plan now for how we're going to remedy that? Once it's safe for kids to go back, stop making the issue of kids' education be the reason that we've got to carry on letting the virus spread through the community. I just think we're getting it the wrong way round. We've really got to be caring about how much transmission occurs through the school and back out to society. Of course, we want to stop kids getting like their education and being impacted. I'm only just realising now how much my kids are impacted by the first lockdown, and how that's, you know, spending so much time in them homeschooling now. Like, you know, I can see it, so I know my kids are going to suffer the same. So I want everybody, I understand that. We all want to make sure that our kids get through that, but there are ways to do that, aren't there? And there is no way that I want my kids' education to be put above somebody else's right to life or safety. I mean, for goodness sake, nobody wants that, do they? We can find ways through this and keep people safe as we do. So I think there's some quite big issues there around the schools and the NHS. Another one that actually, I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but with the way that the NHS is being sort of scapegoated at the moment, I wasn't even so much aware of this, but an NHS group in some doctors have started fundraising so that they can run their own advertising campaign to show that it's not on them that the NHS is struggling, because they feel like in some areas the message has been put out there that their elective surgeries and things like that haven't been done because of GPs refusing to open and GPs refusing to meet people. So they're actually crowdfunding to try and put up billboards and things like that to essentially protect the reputation of the NHS. But it's just really made me think, is there another kind of undercurrent going on here to influence the nation to think that we need to privatise as well? I mean, perhaps the test and trace not going to the NHS is part of that. I don't know. What do you think about that, Ian?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, listen, the reason what the example you've just given is very interesting, but I think the general public are absolutely astounded at how well the NHS have adapted. I mean, some of these key line workers, key workers in the front line, particularly the doctors and the nurses in the ICU units and the ITU units. I mean, the work they've done. And listen, I wouldn't be surprised that at the end, after this pandemic is behind us, that we have a lot of these people who given their all 24/7. Many at the beginning without PPE, many who have been using iPads with patients and their families, sadly seeing them pass on. Many who have been wearing masks and are like scarred by using the mask. Many who have been frightened to go to work because it didn't, or they haven't had the correct PPE and they didn't want to take it home to their families. Many who have been separated from their families as well. This is unbelievable, and anything that anybody might wish to say to criticise the NHS, well, should meet with the most vehement opposition. They've been absolutely brilliant. They really have, as have other key workers as well. And I think we're talking about the potential privatisation of the NHS. That's always been on the cards. TTIP, it was be involved in the TTIP discussions. It's back on the table, and I don't care what anybody tells you, by the way. I'm telling you, never trust the Conservatives with the NHS, because they'll sell it as soon as they can. They would sell it at a car boot sale if they thought they could get rid of it to their chums at a cheap enough price. Never believe what they say about the NHS. And the reason why there are criticisms is because they're looking for scapegoats. Boris Johnson and his cronies are looking for scapegoats for the absolutely disastrous way that they've addressed this pandemic from day one. From the fact that he never even bothered turning up to the Cobra meetings, right away up to now, Boris Johnson has been an utter disaster for this country. And as 106,000 people died as a result of the Tories' incompetence. So they'll blame the teachers when the schools are transmitting the COVID-19 and the different strains. They'll blame people in the NHS for the amount of deaths or whatever. They'll blame anybody but themselves for the position this country now. It's arguably the 5th richest economy in the world, and we've seen 105,000 people die of COVID-19 of all different ages, and we haven't yet seen an apology from the cabinet nor from the Prime Minister. And to see him last week, to see him with his head bowed, was absolutely outrageous. It was a stage performance, good enough for the West End, because that's what it is. The man, really, in my view, the man is way out of his depth, not interested in the detail, and as a consequence, that the country is suffering greatly with the deaths, the transmission rates, all of which could increase again. Yep, they're going down at this moment in time, but they're going to go from a very high bar. But we've got an issue facing in the next couple of weeks, as whether Johnson then begins to listen to Sunak about the economy, driving the economy forward by releasing the restrictions too early or easing the restrictions too early. We're talking already about getting schools back, in the next couple of weeks or so. It's absolutely outrageous, and at some stage, I'm afraid, somebody's going to have to hold the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson to account, because it really isn't happening at this moment of time, and it isn't any good. It really isn't any good continuing to be forensic, but not holding the Prime Minister and the Cabinet to account by forensic questioning without any passion, without any commitment, without any dedication. People are wondering what's happening, and I'll tell you, in years to come, when the historians write about the COVID-19 pandemic in this really wealthy country of ours, Labour will be equally as culpable as what the Conservative government are, because we've said time and time again, we support the government, we support the government, we support the government. Well, let me tell you, Jennifer, Mr. Lavery doesn't support the government. Simple as that.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to find any disagreement with that here. I know you, Bonnie, have been equally as passionate about that this week as well, haven't you?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we're standing by with a government that have failed at every decision to protect the people. They failed on the health grounds. They failed on protecting the economy. The only parts that they've succeeded on is ensuring the people that have already got more money than they can spend in 10 lifetimes have got richer. Now that we've got a front bench prepared and racing each other to stand shoulder to shoulder with a government that's responsible for the death of over 100,000 of our people who were, loved, were parents, were children, were partners, whatever, members of people's family. Those lives have been lost for no reason. The government should be being torn to pieces right now. There is no way that Boris Johnson should be getting platitudes from the leader of the Labour Party when working class people are being put to their death every day on the basis of decisions being made by this criminally neglectful government, as far as I'm concerned.
100%, Bonnie. And you, Sarah, I know, we've been really struggling with this lack of opposition, haven't we? Like, it scares me. That's my issue with it. It actually scares me. The consequences. Doing opposition is essential to the function of our system. That's how our system is set up. So we can't just choose to step out of that now when the country's in the biggest crisis, arguably, that it's ever faced. It's more important, not less, that we actually do that opposition with the kind of ferocity that it needs, frankly, because it is that serious, isn't it? So I know you're just as passionate as well, aren't you, Sarah?
Yeah. I mean, what Labour's strategy seems to be at the moment is be as as least not controversial as possible. Pretty much agree with the government. Maybe say, oh, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. Try not to look left wing in any way, shape, or form, and just say as little as possible. And that seems to be the plan at the moment. And surely opposing the government and picking everything they do wrong up and making everyone aware of it is surely more important than having an interview in the Daily Mail, for example, or and trying to win those voters. The opposition has a duty to oppose the government and make everyone aware of every mistake they made. They should be screaming it from the rooftops. I mean, don't get me started about that NHS, the government campaign, with the mask saying, look at them in the eyes and tell them they are doing. I mean, and then they're starting on the NHS as well, the government. So it's just like a divide and rule, kind of strategy that the government's playing with everybody in the country at the moment. I mean, us locally with NHS, we're being used as a bit of a guinea pig because they've set up an integrated care system in South Yorkshire and Bassett Law. So I know Bonnie's very, very aware of what those are, and they're basically looking at 8 acute hospitals in the entire South Yorkshire Bassett Law area, and looking at where they can cut services to put them into other hospitals. And basically the idea is to gradually reduce the services one by one in smaller hospitals and put them into bigger hospitals. So in Rotherham we've lost children's, non-specialist children's specialist, surgery and things like that. Emergency stroke service we've lost, which is ridiculous, considering if you're having a stroke, every minute counts. And some out of hours services. And the same has been done in Doncaster and in Barnsley. They've lost some other out of hours and young people services as well. And what you've seen is in Sheffield and Doncaster, those services have been expanded. So now we've got, there's just under 270,000 people in Rotherham, and they're all going to be sent to these bigger hospitals and putting extra pressure on these hospitals. So that's what we've got at the moment, and it's they're doing it bit by bit, so people don't realise. But having said that, the government's trying its best to make people, turn against NHS and as a precursor to maybe a more two-tiered system. But I think people's individual experiences of the NHS at the minute are nothing but good. My mum had to be rushed to A&E a couple of weeks ago. Nothing generally serious, but we had no complaints. She was given a full MOT. So anybody that says that the NHS is failing the country in any way, people's experiences are they're not failing the country in any way. They're doing exactly what they should do, and that's taking care of the health of the country in a full, and complete manner, as they always do. And also at the moment we're doing well with the vaccines. They've just set up a vaccine centre at the Sheffield Arena, and I think we're on over 65s in Rotherham at the moment, so they're doing really well with the vaccines and getting them out to people. And as everywhere else, the COVID wards are absolutely full to the rafters. And apparently there's about 35 people in it, with 2 nurses looking after 35 people on the COVID ward. So that just shows you what pressure the nurses and the staff who are working at wards are under.
Jennifer, you know what? The NHS, what a formidable organisation, full of absolutely fantastic people, whether it's the top surgeon to the porter. What a great well-oiled machine it is, and look at how successful we've been only in the past few weeks with the vaccinations. Absolutely brilliant, and that's because the NHS have been in charge. Can you imagine what could have been, what might have been, if indeed the NHS were actually tasked with the responsibility of the track, test and trace system, because that was farmed out to the Tory cronies. Dido Harden, I think it was £23 billion we spent, and it just simply didn't work. Where is that now? Can you imagine if we'd just given that to the NHS, like everybody was saying at the time, where we might be at this moment in time? Quite different,
It's almost mind-blowing, isn't it, the amount of money that they managed to waste and be happy to give away when it's their crony mates that are going to be taking the benefits from it, when we could have been investing that in the NHS. And just to pick up on a point that you made, Sarah, about how they're really successfully managing to blame individuals. I think polling showed that this week, hasn't it? Some polling came out to show that more people think that individuals are responsible for the spread of COVID in society than blaming the government. But if there is no counter narrative put out there from the opposition explaining the government's failures, and the government are quite successfully blaming individuals, there is no reason for them to think that. And it's not just a matter of scoring points against the government. It's like, how do we begin to get the country back on track unless people are accurately able to understand why we are in this mess, rather than being fed all this nonsense? It's actually incredibly dangerous in the moment to keep letting them off the hook. We won't be able to solve it. Bonnie, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to say, also picking up on what you said there, Sarah, that was really important. The breaking up and redistribution of hospital services through integrated care organisations is absolutely the blueprint for bringing in American private healthcare insurance companies. This is exactly what they wanted to see happen, and this was all put in train by the appalling Health and Social Care Act 2012, which was co-authored by the Lib Dems with the Tories. So obviously both of those parties I hold culpable for the deliberate breakdown of our National Health Service. It needs to be it needs to be properly integrated. It needs to provide all of the healthcare services everybody needs at the point of needing it, and it should be publicly provided. So every service that is required within the NHS should be delivered by somebody who is employed by the NHS. We've got to get rid of this tendering or skipping a tendering process for the provision. If we were to get rid of those, we wouldn't have seen those billions and billions of pounds to be siphoned off by Dido Harding.
No, absolutely. It's literally like death by 1,000 cuts for the NHS. I mean, it's slicing off bits of services here, there and everywhere, largely in ways that the public can't see. There's so much of it going on. And we really need to be strong on pushing back against that. Ian, do you think we've got any possibility of convincing the Labour Party at the moment that we're going to retake up that front? Because this thing that Sarah's mentioned about the ICOs and accountable care organisations and all that, I've heard that that's likely to be coming back again in the autumn for everywhere. And this has been a real big concern of mine for ages. And it took us quite a while to get the Labour Party on board with that. And I'm not really sure where we are with that. I mean, I know that's not your particular area, but I don't know if you've heard that we are likely to be mounting a campaign, or do you think we should try and push the Labour Party into it?
Well, we've always got to keep campaigning, Jennifer, everything that's right, everything that's just, because we don't campaign, then I'm afraid things don't happen by themselves. Anything the left have ever done, have had to fight for. Everything the left have ever had, they've got to fight to keep. And everything that what the left want to win, we've got to fight for. So, you know, we've got to keep fighting, you know, morning, night and noon, and it's as simple as that. And as my great comrade Arthur Scargill used to say, you know, I used to say that the victory is in the struggle itself, and I just think that's so true. You know, the struggles like 365 a year. You know, it isn't like just on and off like a tap. It's a thing that we continue with. It didn't just start, Jennifer. The struggle didn't start with 2015. With the beginning of communism. The struggle started many years ago, you know, like as far back as like the 1300s, and you mentioned the Tolpuddle mortars, for example, in the early 1800s. You know, the struggle is something there, and it'll be there long after us four are gone from the face of this planet, and that's what we've got to get people to recognise. You know, the struggle isn't just a certain 3 or 4 year period in time. The struggle is something what was begun many years ago. We stand on the shoulders of giants, many people who paid the ultimate sacrifice, and we cannot let them down as the left. We've got to keep motivating people. We've got to keep fighting the good fight. We've got to ensure that we're there leading from the front, being vociferous, or whether it's the NHS, whether it's education, whether it's wages, terms and conditions, we've got to make sure that we are always there. In saying that, Jennifer, I'm going to push me luck and just say we have been discussing, you know, like the buildings. We've been discussing Grenfell earlier. Can we give a shout out from today's programme to the Shrewsbury 24 campaign? The Shrewsbury 24 campaign resulted from many people 24 people being convicted in 1972 on the construction sites. And they were convicted under the 1875 Conspiracy Act. And the government are yet to produce or allow the publication of all government documents, which will provide some hair-raising information. And this week, due to the tremendous work of the campaign, in particular Eileen Turnbull, they're actually in court on a court of appeal, hoping to get the courts to agree to release all the documentation, government documentation, minutes, decisions of what actually happened in 1972, because it was an absolute outrage. It just shows you now that people have been involved in like the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. We've got to keep fighting and fighting and fighting. Here we are in 2021. Eileen's team are in court this week, and this happened in 1972. We never get note for note. We only get what we fight for.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for that, Ian. Actually really inspiring, and I totally agree. I think we can see that the left in the Labour Party and outside the Labour Party has taken a bit of a battering over the last couple of years, but I really feel like now I'm really getting that vibe that people have dusted themselves off and they're getting back up and really getting stuck in, because we can see the change is not going to happen without us being there, present in that fight every step of the way. And I think we're really building towards making some big noises now. So we're coming to the end of the show, so I just want to give everyone a quick moment. Have you got a final takeaway thought that you want to hit everyone out there with to inspire them on their way tonight? Bonnie, shall I go to you first?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I would say, I mean, I agree with everything that Ian's just said, and well done to all of those campaigners that have kept the fight alive. I'm going to have to say that unless our front bench are prepared to start standing up for what the people need, for the working class people need in this country, and start opposing the Tory government, then they need to start considering preparations to stand up or step aside.
Thanks for that, Bonnie. And Sarah, what would you say?
What I would say is that all those members in your CLPs, next time it's your AGM, stick your hand up, get involved with your CLP, and try and change the party from within. Because if you don't stick your hand up and if you don't volunteer for positions, nothing will ever happen within the party. We'll never get any change happening within the party. And I know a lot of people aren't very happy with it at the moment, but you need to keep sticking your hands up, get into those officer positions and get into those CLP positions.
Yeah, really important point, Sarah. And it can't be said enough. We need people to keep getting stuck in, because it is hard work, and we need to keep rejuvenating and keeping the left alive. And that's a great way to keep people involved and do it. So, Ian, what's your takeaway thought for everyone tonight?
Well, my takeaway thought is simple. If we want equality, if we want justice, if we want hope, aspiration and fairness, like we saw in the manifestos of 17 and 19, if we want that, stop crying in your beer. Agitate, educate and organise, for heaven's sake. Our demands most moderate are, we only want the earth.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ian. Thanks everyone for joining us.